So, welcome to week 13. Actually, on one level, it's week 15, but it's week 13 to us. And it's class 13, let's put it that way. Today, we're going to be focusing on a little bit related to the final project and a little bit related to a very important topic, responsive web design. By the start of this module, you should have read the article that was part of last week's assignment, and it's a 2-week assignment. You know, you read the article, you respond with your comments, and then you respond to a classmate's post, as we do with all of our discussions. And that article was related to responsive web design. And the very important aspects of responsive web design that we want to understand and apply are utilizing what are called media queries to a CSS document that define different layouts for different screen sizes, and those screen sizes are known as breakpoints. And typically, you create a composition that has a desktop breakpoint, a tablet breakpoint, and a smartphone breakpoint. And we're going to be working on those in relationship to the final project. So I do want to say that at 10 o'clock, I will need to leave this meeting. I get to go to another meeting at 10, but I will be working right up until that moment and hopefully answering any questions you have as well. And if you have questions that I can't address during that time, then I can make an appointment with you afterwards. Okay, so that being said, responsive CSS and media queries. A breakpoint is the screen width dimension at which a new group of CSS rules kick in and is applied based on the parent media query. And in the early days, there were 4 breakpoints. One of the breakpoints was anything with a screen width of less than 320 pixels. But there's very few people using that size device anymore. So now there are some different breakpoints that we're going to examine in a couple of minutes. But I do want to talk about a couple of other very important terms first. First of all, viewport. So mobile browsers need instructions from you how to scale the content into the mobile browser's available screen dimension. And this is what's known as the meta tag with the viewport name. So meta, by the way, is a very important tag to do some research on your own. There are 21 different attributes for the meta tag. One of them is the name attribute. And the name attribute, we're going to apply the value viewport to. And basically what we're doing is telling the viewport to scale the content of the page to the viewport at an initial scale of 100%. Okay? That's basically what we're doing here. So that's what the viewport does. As soon as the page loads up, make sure that the content is scaled to the full size of the viewport. Okay, this is a standard line of code that we put in every responsive web design document. Now, responsive images and rich media, this is also important. When we start coding CSS for our pages with an awareness of the varied screen width the content may appear within, we need to consider extra CSS property specifications to ensure that images and video do not appear oversized for their parent containers. In other words, let's say you have a video that you shot that's 800 by 600, which isn't a large size. It's, you know, if you go to YouTube, most of the stuff that you see in those windows is at least that size. So what we do to accommodate the fact that somebody may be looking at a document on a phone or on a tablet, we set the max width value to be 100%. And then we put images or videos into parent containers. So for example, if you have a column that's part of your page and we put the image inside of the column, then the image is going to have a maximum width of 100% within that parent. So that's the important thing to remember. We don't leave the image or the video at the body tag. We put an image or a video inside of a container, whether that's a normally it wouldn't be a header, whether it's a section, whether it's an article, whether it's an aside. Those are typical parents for images and videos, right? So you'll notice, of course, when we see image, comma, video, that's what type of CSS selector when we see that, a tag defined like that. Starts with an M, like M&Ms. Nobody's going to tell me when we see like this right here. Well, no. When you have, you see, you have two different tags that are defined within the same rule. What type of tag selector is that called? Good guess, Fred. Everybody's drawing a blank. It's Monday morning. Okay, I'll give you a buy on this one, but pay attention. This is a multiple tag selector, right? When you have more than one tag that is being defined by the same set of properties within a declaration block, that's called a multiple tag selector, okay? In this case, the IMG tag, the video tag, oftentimes we'd see iframe in there as well. We're setting the maximum width to be 100% and the height to be auto. So that's very important when you're dealing with images and rich media content within a responsive web design page. Now let's talk specifically about media queries. So while simply setting all the widths to percentage base values can cause a multiple column layout to scale to fit its window, it's not sufficient for most sites. As columns shrink, the legibility suffers and element collisions can occur. Therefore, you have to use CSS media queries to create sets of rules to define unique multi-column layouts. So I'll give you an example. I'm going to go to the SRJC new website. And first, I'm going to download a little responsive web design plugin so you can see how this works. Responsive web design Chrome extension. Viewport Resizer. This is one that I've used many times. I'm going to send you this link. Viewport Resizer is a great way for you to see what your page is going to look like within different scenarios. So I clicked added to Chrome, and why is nothing happening? Let's try that again. Let me go to my extensions here. That's right. You don't need to have that kind of thing. You can just use your extensions. Where are my extensions hiding? Resizer. Viewport Resizer, that's what I'm supposed to be clicking on here. I already clicked on it, but for some reason it's not responding. It says it's added to Chrome already. Why am I not seeing it in here? This is just one of those days. Where is it? Disable. It's not popping up in here. So, and I'm having the hardest time getting to my extensions. So I'm going to try it this way. Chrome extension. Sorry about this. I should be able to just click here and get to my extensions. And there we are, extensions. Okay, now viewport resizer, where it happened to my viewport resizer. There we go. It says it's enabled. Isn't that funny? How about we throw it away and reinstall it? Because as you saw, it was not showing up on my thingy. Resizer, viewport resizer. Try that one more time. Add to Chrome, add extension. You see, and now it shows up right there. It wasn't there before. Okay, so let's go back to this. We see that the new SRJC page does respond very nicely, as we can go down to this size, and I'll show you with the viewport resizer. It drops this little window down here. And we can say, show me at a Apple Cinema display, show me at a widescreen display, show me at a 17-inch display, show me at a tablet display, show me at a small tablet, show me at a phone. So you can see that using the system that we currently use at the JC, this works pretty well. I'm going to go back to a laptop display. And in order for you to, the one downside of this plugin is that this bar that drops down here kind of makes kind of a screenshot looking thing, and you can't really navigate. Like if I go here, you see it says access denied, cross-domain security error. You have to go out of that extension to be able to actually move around to different pages. So you check the page with the extension, and then you can come back to the extension. Now I'm showing you an example of an old page. And I'm gonna, let's see, faculty portal home. Yeah, this is pretty ugly looking. So if I go here, and now I go to phone size, you see what it does. It just looks like yuck. Ouch is right, Max. So basically, our old website was not responsive. It just pretty much looked like this, no matter what size you had. And that's the situation that many people are in. So that's the importance of having a responsive web design. Now, I'm going to go back to the page that we're looking at here, the assignment, the class 13 lecture pages, and go over typical media queries. And we're essentially looking at the media queries number one, and I've got 4 listed here. 3 are required, but 4 are what I'm showing you here. Basically, what a media query does is it uses the following code: at media, this line right here. And I'm going to make this bigger so we can see this. Basically, you'll see it starts with something. When you see a slash and a star, anything inside of slash, star, star, slash is a comment. So you'll probably start each media query with a comment that says, this is for phones, right? And then you'll have rules listed within there, okay? And you'll see here, number 1, there are no media queries because this is what's called the base set of rules, okay? And I'm going to show you that in a couple of minutes on my example page. Then we have a comment for small devices. Okay? Now, this comment for small devices says anything with a width a width greater than 768 is going to have this set of rules. And then we're saying medium devices like desktops. Anything with a minimum width of 992 pixels is going to have this set of rules. And then finally, anything for large devices like widescreen with a minimum width of 1200 pixels is going to have this set of rules. So the most important thing to consider here is that first set of rules where there is no media query, that covers everything from 0 to 768 pixels. And I'll show you an example of that right now. It probably will be helpful. So what I've got over here is, let me get to my styles page. What I've got over here is a very long style sheet. I'm going to put it right front and center here for us to see. And I'm going to make it even bigger. So let's see if I can do this just by hitting the plus key. Yes, that works. How about that? You'll notice right at the beginning, my line number 1 says /* mobile layout, 480 pixels and below, end */. So that's my comment. And then I'm having a really long set of rules. It goes from line 2 all the way to line 208. Those are all my first set of rules that are not within a media query. This is super important to understand. Basically, what this is saying is that everything from line 2 to line 208 are going to apply to every page, every page, and every size. And what that means, when I say every size, that means it's going to apply by default to every size. But then at line 210, what we see is a new media query. Right here on line 211, it says at media screen and min width 480. So anything larger than your smaller phone sizes. Basically, everything that's listed in this set of media queries is going to override these rules up here. In other words, when we create a style sheet for a website, when we create a responsive web design style sheet for a website, we do it in a way that's called mobile ready. We apply a set of rules to the smallest size, and then we only override those rules at the end of our style sheet. So you'll notice I only have 3 rules for this size. Basically, what these 3 rules say is, instead of a single column, and you'll see this as an example in a minute, instead of a single column, I want to have 2 columns because I have 2 sections here and I'm setting widths to them. Okay? And then if I have more than 2 columns, in which case I do, I have a 3rd column, have that break below these 2 columns. You'll see all of this in action in a minute. And then I have my next media query that only has a couple of rules also. And I'm going to just start with these 2 here because they go along with these here. Basically, what this says here is now take each of those sections and turn it into a 3-column page. In other words, set section 1 and section 2 to have a width of 30-something% and have the aside, which was my 3rd column, a width of 28%. And notice I'm not clearing any floats anymore, so this aside will set up next to my section 1 and section 2. And again, you'll see all of this in action. The only other thing that you normally change in your responsive web design style sheet is how your navigation works. In other words, we see here in my desktop layout, my navigation is set to be horizontal and have each navigation item to be a width that is equal to 100% for all of my items. In other words, I have 6 items, I have 6 links on this page. I've set the width to them to be 16.4%. But when I get to a web page that's being viewed on a phone, I don't want that. I want each navigation item to be stacked on top of each other. So we see here, navigation width is set to 100%. Now, of course, I'm talking, and showing you lines of code instead of letting you see what that page looks like. Let's take a look at it. I'm going to open that page, and I'm going to move this over to the right, and I'm going to preview that page. Not that. Wait a second. File. Live preview. File. Live preview. Okay. So here's what we see. We see a header, and we see our navigation. So this navigation should make sense to you now in terms of this style sheet. That way down here at the bottom, my screen, I thought my screens were big. I need bigger screens. Always bigger screens. Okay, my navigation way down here at the bottom, we see width is set to 16.4%. That's because I have 6 links, right? I'm filling the width of my desktop screen with those widths, right? They're floating, so each one is next to each other, right? They have a border, they have different colors, blah, blah, blah. And section 1, here's section 1. Section 2, here's section 2. Those are 31% of the page. Section 3, my aside, is set to be 28%. Now, I could try to make this a little bigger, and I've messed around with this before, and that works pretty good. As you can see, this is what my page looks like at a desktop layout. But at a tablet layout, I want this third column, my aside, to float under because I want this to be easy to read. So that plugin doesn't work inside of my local view. So I'm going to show it to you in a remote view here. Come on, you go over there. You can still see my screen, right, folks? Everybody? You see Zoom window. Oh boy. Okay. How about now? You can see my screen again? Okay. You know what's funny? Teaching the content is not that hard. Moving the windows around, on the other hand, is very challenging. Okay, let me get here and go to C9 so you can see. So here's that page that I was just showing you. I have 3 monitors, Max. And I have a couple of 22-inch and then a 32-inch in the center. I really think I need like a 45-inch and a 32-inch. I'm monitor crazy. Okay, so let me run this page. And open it. Okay, here. So we're seeing this, and now I'm going to be able to use my little viewport resizer here. And we see what it looks like at, your typical widescreen. We see what it would look like at a 17-inch display. Still looks good. And now we go down to a tablet display, and you'll notice what happened. I have 2 columns, and then I have my 3rd column down below. And that's this set of rules from line 210 to line 224. It says section 1 and section 2. Set them to a width of 46%. Now I could probably get away with maybe kicking this up to 47%, but that's not going to change this here because this is in the cloud and this is locally, right? But sometimes you have to just mess with the numbers and do a lot of trial and error. So we see section 1 and section 2 are both floating. Section 1 is floating left, section 2 is floating right. That gives me a little even space in between them. The aside is clearing both of those floats and setting up below it. So when I'm looking at a tablet, I don't want to see 3 columns. It just gets too crowded. And you'll also notice that my navigation has changed as well. Where did it get this information for the navigation change? It didn't get it from here. Because the only things that remember, we read this from the very beginning to the very end. We set up with all of these rules, and until a rule changes in a new media query, everything's going to look like it would on a phone. So on a phone size, we have this navigation looking like this, right? It's Apple iPhone, small tablet. Yeah, okay. We have it looking like this on a small phone, but you see the navigation is right on the top, right? Now that is perfectly fine. We have our navigation on the top. When we get to the tablet size, we don't necessarily want to change that navigation. The reason that we have the navigation on the top is because when people are looking at phones, they're using their fingers. We want to have that navigation to be really easy to see. So this navigation stays the same for phone size and for tablet size. It doesn't change until we get to desktop size. And once it's at desktop size, then we're like, okay, then the person is using a mouse, they roll their mouse over all of the links. So it's super important to remember, and I will essentially, while you look at this, I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll send you an example of my style sheet as a homework attachment, but you're going to, of course, have to reset it for your own particular use. But conceptually, the thing that's important to understand is we're setting up our style sheet to be for a phone. We're only changing the things that we want to have different once we get to tablet size or desktop size. And normally, what I change is I change the number of columns. So desktop, maybe 3 columns, tablet, maybe 2 columns, and phone is always going to be a single column. So you can see each of these sections and asides are now 100% width, and they're block level items, so they stack on top of each other. It's not till I get to tablet size that my first 2 sections become floating, and my third one clears the float and breaks underneath it. And then when I get to desktop size, where each one becomes floating. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Thank you. Next. So that's what's really important to keep in mind when it comes to creating your style sheet. Now, for this next week's assignment, you're going to be starting on your responsive design. You're not going to have all of your rules in there yet, but I do want you to focus on your navigation and on your multiple column layout. Everything else that I have in here, aside from like the IMG, and you'll notice on line 19 of my code, not only do I have IMG and video, I also have object, embed, and iframe. This is a multiple selector, multiple tag selector. I'm setting the maximum width to 100% for all of these elements that may contain multimedia. Okay? So you see that I've got more than just IMG and video in there. Now, all of the rest of the stuff that I have here, you're not going to have to worry about, a lot of it for this next week's assignment. But as you're building out your style sheet for your final project, you're going to want to start including more and more information. I'm going to go over what you are required to have for next week's. Can you have font changes for each size? Absolutely, no doubt. So here are the things that are required for your style sheet for your initial page, which is due next week. You need to use a web font. We've used web fonts before. You should review the assignments if you don't remember how to do that. If not, if you can't find it, all you'd have to do is go using web fonts W3 school, and you'll get, here takes you to all the different the ways that you can use either the font face or font. Just the font face is the primary way that we use it. And you can see that's what I have on my style sheet. Okay, so you are required to have a web font. You are required to develop a color scheme. Okay, and you'll see my color scheme, and you already kind of saw my color scheme, but my color scheme has a total of 4 colors in it. I encourage you to use Peloton as the tool that will help you develop your color scheme. You can reuse your color scheme from your midterm project. So you're required to have a web font, you're required to have a color scheme, you are required to have a navigation system. So at this point, you want to come up with what are your topics, right? And your final site is going to have 6 pages. So you see that I came up with my navigation rules. And another thing, as a reminder, when I create a style sheet, I always put comments in my style sheet. So when I go back to my style sheet, it's easy for me to find the information. These are all of my rules that apply to phone sizes, to somebody looking at my page on a phone, right? It's got its width set to 100%, it's block display, and then everything else is, just written as it's written, right? And then we see I have image-related rules. I have a figure. It's displayed as a block. It's maximum width. I have my figure image that has a max width set to be 98%, so it has a little room on the sides of it. I have my fig caption, because remember, all of my images are going to show up inside of figures, right? I have some table rules. You don't have to worry about that right now. I've got form rules. You don't have to worry about those right now. I have some ID selectors. You don't have to worry about those right now. I have some class selectors. You don't have to really worry about those right now. You do have to think about those in terms of floating, because one of the things that is required for this next week's assignment is that you're using multiple column layout. But those are all of my rules that apply to phone. And these are the only changes that I have when it gets to the tablet. I change my number of columns. Here's the only changes that I have when it gets to desktop. I change the number of columns, and I change my navigation system, so instead of them stacking on top of each other like this, they're going side by side like that. So those are the main things that you want to pay attention to. Okay, so I'm going to get back to here, and I'm going to go through the rest of this document with you, and then give you a couple minutes to ask questions. So you're going to create a responsive CSS. I'm going to send you an example. This example I'm going to make a bit shorter so you can have a short example to take a look at. Okay? What do you need to do for next week specifically? Well, you're going to identify the content sources for your text, for your visual imagery. You're going to create your initial responsive multi-page design, right? Now, you already created your multi-column page design for this week, and that should have already included your global navigation. Now you're going to start putting in your identity information, and I'll share what that means in a minute. And then you're going to share your project proposal and initial page design with classmates in the shared discussion for this next week, okay? The following week, you're going to revise your responsive multi-column page design, and you're going to add a form. Then the following week, we're going to add some, we're going to create the draft version of all 6 of our pages. We're going to incorporate some more CSS. And then the following week, we're going to deliver the final site. So specifically, what do you have to do for this page? Now let me change the setting here so this is easier to review. Like I said, you're going to have a global navigation, multiple links organized as an unordered list within a navigation element, an identity, an image representing a logo or identity graphic for the site, your color palette, 1 or more web fonts, at least 2 images using figure and fig caption, making sure to use HTML5 as the structure of your page, 2 or more paragraphs with content, and then a multi-column style sheet which has media queries that are defined like this. Your HTML page has to have header, nav, section, article, aside, footer, and some H1 through H6. Your external CSS file has to include border, clear, display, float, margin, padding, position, and width. Okay? The idea is that you're getting a first page setup. Okay? All the rest of these steps for submitting are straightforward. You'll see that in a minute. And I'm going to get back to what, you know what, let me cover this now in the context of what you're seeing here. So let's take a look at my index page. We see number 1 that global navigation. We see number 1, let's see, where is that hiding out here? Okay, see number 1, I have my navigation. I have my logo. Now you probably don't have a logo, but find an image that you can put inside of your header area. That's the normal place for your logo to go. Okay? Let's move this down here. Then, so we have the global navigation, we see that. We have the identity, we see that. We have the color palette, we see my color palette is maroon and blue and gray and white, right? Very straightforward, nothing fancy about it, but it's clean and it pops off the page. 1 or more web fonts, we see I have a web font right here. This one is linking to a Google API, and then on the style sheet, I use the font face to call that that font, that web font, right? Content, at least 2 images using figure and fig caption. And we see here's one image, here's another image. There's, if I look at the code here, we see that there is, okay, we're not, yeah, this is the problem with this, looking at it locally. Let's look at it this way. Okay, when we look at the content here, we see that I have inside of section 1, I have figure, I have my image, I have my alt, I have the fig caption, and that's all within a parent container section, right? Then in my next section, I have another image that's inside of figure as well. That's why I end up with this image and this image, okay? Back to here. So that's my content, and then use of HTML5 semantic elements, header, nav, footer, aside, section, article, and some H1 through H6. You don't have to use all of them. Okay, 2 or more paragraphs of contextual content. In other words, you're setting up your basic skeleton at this point for your final project, right? And you have all of the HTML that I went over right here with the various HTML5 tags that we discussed. You are using multiple page layout. You already did a multiple page layout last week. All you really have to do now is start making modifications to apply responsive media queries to that layout to make it look different depending upon the viewport. Remember, we start with mobile, so that means everything should be single column. It only becomes multiple column once we get to tablet size and desktop size. Okay? Back to the assignment instructions. Your external style sheet has to have border, clear, display, float, margin, padding, position, and width. You've used all of these. So this part of it shouldn't be a problem, okay? And the submission directions are straightforward there, so you're not gonna have to worry about those. The other thing that you need to do for next week is you need to review the HTML5 semantic elements and the CSS box model. The materials are found in the chapters related to those subjects. You want to take the quiz based on the chapters related to the box model and the HTML5 semantic elements. Okay. Finally, in this class 12-13 discussion, you're finishing up responding to a classmate regarding the article about responsive web design. You're responding to their post. And this is where we will see a link to this week's screencast. Keep in mind, this set of lecture slides can be very helpful to you. It goes over a couple of things. Let me go through this. We already talked about all of this, what has to be in your final project for this next week. We talked about breakpoints. We talked about meta viewports. We talked about responsive images. We talked about how you define media queries. And it's super important that you look at a media query. It always starts with @media, and then in parens, the minimum width for that media query. In other words, this media query is going to start for anything above this size. So this media query actually starts at 768 pixels wide, right? So then we see, here's where we see multiple media queries. And at the end of all of your media queries, and you'll see it right in here as I move this over for you to see, at the end of all these media queries, we start our web page, and then we see all of our rules, right? No problem, all of our rules. And then we come down to this first media query, and it says @media, and then it has a curly brace and a ending curly brace for that set of media, for that media query, right? So there's a curly brace and an end curly brace for the media query itself. Then we see the next media query, and that has a curly brace and has a curly brace at the end of that media query as well. So each media query is within its own set of curly braces. Okay? So back to here real quick. We see the responsive layout example. Here's an example of what it's going to look like in a desktop. Here's an example of what it will look like in a tablet. Here's an example of what it would look like on a phone. Okay, does that make sense to you folks? Great, thank you, Fred. The main thing is you're going to want to experiment with this, okay? And the last part of this is you want to read you want to go through all of the modules for this week to make sure that you're up to speed on everything. But for example, and I was thinking of Debbie for this one, she used a great Flexbox for week 13. So here's her Flex layout. Let's see if I can get it to show up here. So this is a great example of using flex layout, right? It's multiple column, and it looks really nice. But then when we get down to, you know, a smaller size, at this point it should break into 2 columns and then break into 1 on top of each other, right? So she can continue to, and of course the navigation would change to also, instead of doing, you know, next to each other, they would become a stack, like in my example. So you're basically taking what you did for your final project proposal and you're working with that. So if I was using the Flexbox model, what I would do is I would be doing something like that. I would be doing something like media queries with Flex display, or something like that. Flexbox with media queries, right? A lot of different ways to approach it, because it all depends on which model you use for your multiple column layout. Okay, now I'm going to need to end this recording. We did cover everything that's in this week's lesson. If you have other questions, I want you to shoot me an email, and if it's something that's more complex than simply having the question answered in an email, shoot me an email and we'll make an appointment for an online meeting. I need to go to some other work-related meeting, which, by the way, is not fun because it has very little to do with teaching. But that's what we do. So thank you, Max. So like I said, make sure to go over all of the modules, review those lecture slides. The link to this week's lecture will be right up here. And I'm going to leave these older ones that kind of talk. These are from last spring's class. Ethan went into some different details than I did, so that might be useful for you to look at as well. But there's lots of links here from tricks to work with media queries. And like I said, whichever model that you're using, just Google that model and you should be able to find some good information about it. Okay, folks? So thank you all. Have a great rest of your week, and I look forward to hearing from you. Bye-bye.